Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to a D&D 5e review from Heavy Arms at heavyarms.com. With this video, I'll be reviewing the class redesign, the Ranger, designed by Heavy Arms for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you're interested in a sponsored review, please reach out via email, Twitter, or Discord, or my submission form at roguewatson.com. I think at this point late in D&D 5e's life cycle, we're all pretty familiar with the Ranger as the weakest link. From a purely design standpoint, if we just look at the base Ranger from the player's handbook, it really got the short end of the stick because it turns out a lot of us don't really engage with the things that the Ranger is supposed to do, like the woodland stride and the even favorite enemy, but also natural explorer. A lot of these, they just really don't come into play with the whole terrain and environment, and Ranger supposed to having known all this information. There's not a lot of good rules or mechanics that even really support that level of play. So for a lot of groups, you end up kind of hand-waving, I think, a lot of that away. If your party has a Ranger, you just don't engage with it. And even if you don't have a Ranger, a lot of times we don't engage with it. So you lose a major selling point for that character class. And then at what point do you just not want to play a fighter who can use a bow, with the fighting style and everything? Ranger still has, I guess, mostly crappy druid spells that they can work with. So I feel for it. Like, I think the Ranger could be a very cool class and deserve some more unique abilities. But I would absolutely agree with anybody who says that the Ranger, as designed in the original 5th edition, is probably the most underdeveloped and in need of some love, which Tasha's Cauldron of Everything did provide some nice increases to that, basically specifically looking at the abilities the Ranger had that people weren't really engaging with and kind of just replacing them with a bunch of combat abilities, which is fine and at least I think makes that class a little bit more viable and interesting for a lot of players, and then also helped solve things by some more interesting subclasses, although those subclasses also probably need some balancing work. So enter Heavy Arms, the Ranger. This is a complete class redesign that rebuilds the Ranger in an entirely different way. Still a martial class. In fact, this is a completely non-spellcasting version of the Ranger, which is a bold choice. So the main thing that this version of the Ranger gets is focus and bushcraft. And both of them you get right off the bat, which, when I'm looking at classes, first of all, this is not, I don't usually follow my own rules for classes when it comes to a redesign because I'm not really looking to see if your class has, originality or, interesting themes or anything like that. I mean, yeah, I'm still looking for that, but because this is a redesign, so I'm already looking, okay, how well do you serve a class that's already in existence? How do you fix what was wrong with the class initially? And is it worth, using this class instead of the other class? And then what kind of, other features are you adding in there? So in this case, focus and bushcraft. Bushcraft you get at first level, and I'm gonna, I guess, cite the warlock's invocations, even though that feels a little reductive because any class that has a grocery list of things that players can choose from and pick is all going to feel like the warlock invocation, even though this has nothing to do with warlock invocations. And I like that feature. I think warlock's really fun because every warlock gets to pick and choose from this list of extra cool features you can add. Well, that's what bushcraft is. Bushcraft, which, by the way, I wonder if the designer is Australian, because I don't know of anybody who actually refers to like outdoor stuff as the bush other than from Australia, but maybe some of you in the comments will enlighten me on that. But the bushcraft skills allow you to choose several skills. I believe you get to choose a few more as you level up, and then they all have their prerequisites, similar to Invocation, where some of them have certain level requirements. Unlike the Warlock Invocations, however, which I think is interesting here, is there's a little bit of a tiered progression system with some of the bushcraft, which I think 1D&D is actually going to get into when it comes to feats. So in this case, for example, Animal Companion is a bushcraft skill, so there is no baseline, you get an automatic beast for a ranger, or even that you get a beast as a subclass. Instead, you have to choose Animal Companion as your bushcraft skill, and then later, if you want to go increase your Animal Companion's productivity and strength and abilities, then you can take these other more advanced bushcraft skills that kind of build upon the other one. I love that one of them is called a Monster Rancher that gives you a gelatinous cube or a mimic, which is very gnarly and cool and unique. And by the way, the Animal Companion is kind of a cross between the OG one and the new redesigned one from Tasha's. So you don't have the Beast of the Land or anything. You still have a beast, but it increases to a challenge rating of half, and it does increase a lot of their stats to scale along with yours, including hit points and all that. So I don't know the balance of it right there. I've never played my only ranger I played was a multi-class, and I had a warlock companion, a pet, but with back to the chain, so I can't really comment on the OG's animal companion nor the new Tasha's one. This one seems fine, but it's interesting that you have to actually take it as a bushcraft skill. Other bushcraft skills include magic. So like I said, this baseline ranger does not include magic. Normally, you are not a spellcasting ranger. Instead, you have to take, I believe it's called hedge magic, which adds druid spells. And it kind of like the magic initiate feat, where you start off with very few, but then you can take more bushcraft skills and kind of specialize in just spellcasting, and that gives you more specific abilities that maybe are the most useful for rangers, like entangle, spike growth, being able to let's see, tether people, pass without trace, beast sense, animal messenger, everything that, speak with animals, things that make sense that a ranger would probably have. But that's it for spellcasting, which I think is a pretty bold choice. Mutagen craft very much reminds me of The Witcher, where you get to kind of make these concoctions and then drink them, and that becomes all kinds of different abilities that you can gain. We're replacing the Natural Explorer with, I think is it called Natural Explorer? Yes, Natural Explorer, with one called Natural Explorer. But in this case, it gives you like advantages on saves when you're in that terrain, and then again you can add different bushcraft skills on top of that, let you teleport around or dash or do more abilities that might seem a little bit more interesting. Woodland Stride has been increased to make it more interesting. You can be a thrown weapon master. So really you can kind of pick and choose and make your own ranger. And this is important because, I'll get to this later, this class lacks subclasses, and I don't know how it would interact with existing subclasses either. So I don't know how that would work, but I'm not sure. It's interesting. I do like features that let me pick and choose my abilities. I think that is fun. I think Warlock is very fun for that. I don't know of many classes that let me do that, but anything that get, what's an example? Like a fighter, battle master, where you can pick your maneuvers. All of those that allow you to specialize, and then further to where you meet somebody who's the same specialization and they don't even have the same skills as you, is really cool. In this case, you can very much feel like you are building your own specific ranger. On the other hand, it also feels like we stripped some of the base ranger abilities out of the kit, and instead are forcing you to pick and choose them when it comes to your long laundry list of things. So instead of being a fun way of picking extra things, I feel like I have to get like my basic abilities, and I don't wonder if that would like take up my slots to be able to gain my bushcraft skills, because the base ranger doesn't really get very much at all. You have to get all your things through these bushcraft skills, which, by the way, are on their own table. So you gain them, I think I missed saying that earlier, but they work similarly to Warlock Invocations, where you start off with just a few, and then about every other level you gain a new ability, so you expand and expand. So it's an interesting pick and choose, but it's also interesting that you don't have a lot of, like, you don't have baseline spellcasting. The ranger does not have extra attack also, this ranger, which is very interesting, and that is kind of solved by your other main feature, which is focus. So if Bushcraft is inspired by the Warlock Invocations, Focus is inspired by a Monk's Key Points. So a Focus, which you start at 2nd level, you gain 1 Focus at the start of your turn during combat. And I don't believe there's a limit to how many you can have, but there is a limit to how many you can spend, which is up to your proficiency bonus. At level 2, you have 4 different things you can spend Focus on. One of them is you can increase the damage whenever you hit with a light attack. One of them is you gain advantage on a dex save. One of them is you can essentially get the rogue ability to have a bonus action, dash, disengage, or hide by spending focus. Or, probably the most interesting one, when you take the attack action with a ranged weapon, you can spend 2 focus to make an additional weapon attack. So that right there is your extra attack replacement. Now, I don't know exactly how the math ends up working for not having extra attack, but gaining a potential extra attack at 2nd level. However, you have to spend 2 focus for that, so you're not getting it every turn, you're doing it every other turn, and that's if that's the only thing you spend focus on, and it's only for ranged attacks. However, as you level up, you start gaining more and more focus. To the point where I believe at 5th level, you just straight up gain an additional focus at the start of each of your turns. So you can rapid fire every turn if you wanted to. You wouldn't be able to spend focus on anything else. And then at one point, I forget when, but you can gain focus, like all the focus you have up to your wisdom modifier when you start combat. So you can start pretty early. And there it is, at 3rd level, actually. When you roll initiative, you gain a number of focus points equal to your wisdom modifier, as long as you're not surprised. So there's ways you can gain more focus so you can really get this rapid fire off quite a bit. I'm looking at that as your main damage dealer because that's where a lot of the damage from the Ranger's coming. And by the way, no fighting style, that's also in a Bushcraft, to go back to the Bushcraft thing. So it feels weird that you're like pulling things, the Bushcraft is cool, but you're pulling things out and into the Bushcraft. And then with the focus, you're also kind of pulling out the extra attack, but instead giving me rapid fire, which again could be interesting. Potentially you're extra attacking more often earlier in tier 1 if you're willing to wait and spend your focus on that. And then at 5th level, when you would normally get extra attack, instead you just gain more focus, so that really lets you rapid fire all the time. Or you can spend focus on a few other abilities. Let's see, you gain... What are some other abilities on here? 7th, you can spend focus to gain advantage, which is focused aim, so that's a pretty big deal. You can use your reaction at 11th level to use a focus feature that normally takes an action or a bonus action, just using it as a reaction. So you don't really gain a whole lot of new focus abilities like you would Bushcraft skills, but you gain the ability to use them a lot more often. That's an interesting way of redesigning the class. I like the monk key point system. I know some folks don't, but I think it's really fun. I like being able to have a separate resource that I can expend and that I get back fairly quickly on short rests. Whereas the warlock is also interesting like that, but you have so few slots, it still ends up being kind of a stressful, like, oh, do I spend my spells here or not? Monk, I think, can be a lot more judicious about that and feels like you're using a lot of fun abilities, even if monk can end up kind of being a janky class in a lot of ways. So this ranger kind of borrows, what's funny is, from two of my favorite short rest classes to kind of redesign how this works, and I'm kind of liking how it works, especially, focus, you only gain it in combat, so it's not really an out of combat thing you're using, whereas key points, you technically have them until you gain them on a short rest. So it's an interesting way of redesigning the ranger. On paper, I do think it's interesting enough to try it out. I feel like I can't comment on it too much because I have not played a ranger all the way through and would look at some of these abilities and say, oh, this is really nice to have, or I don't mind, losing this ability and gaining that one. And balance is very important, because when I initially saw rapid fire, I was kind of freaking out about, holy crap, how can you let them get another attack when they've already got extra attack? And it took me a second to realize, oh, they don't get extra attack. It's like the only martial class that doesn't get extra attack. Well, I guess rogue also. Instead, you have this rapid fire feature, which I think I like the class. It didn't blow me away necessarily with all of its different abilities. The one thing I thought was very interesting was the Arrowsmith feature on the Bushcraft skills. Lets you craft your own special ammunition, and there's a whole little table here for special ammunition, different abilities like silvered arrows, poison arrows, lightning arrows, arrows that do good against undead, arrows that do good against fairies, arrows that knock people out instead of damaging them, which is always a weird quirk about ranged attacks not being able to knock people unconscious technically. So all that is some cool abilities. I think what I was really wanting and holding my breath for was, okay, give me the subclasses. Let me see what kind of specialties you're going to end up shooting me with, because this feels like a pretty good start, but I need something a little bit more to be able to see what a cool specialized ranger can look like. Fortunately, this class redesign does not come with subclasses, which I think is a huge bummer and a big thumbs down, and a mark against it, because at this point in 5e's life cycle, if you're going to give me a class, you have to give subclasses. And if anything, because I don't know how the subclasses would interact with the ability that every ranger can be very, very different from each other. I know spellcasters can have that way as well because they all have different spells, but in this case, you can literally build your ranger so far differently, and to where I'm worried that the designer baked in what a lot of the, I mean, one of them is literally called Gloomstalker, like what a lot of the subclasses would do into this one version of the Ranger. But I like the subclass system from 5e. I don't want to lose that. So I would have liked to see what this designer would have done with new Ranger specific subclasses, or maybe said, okay, here's how this class would interact with these other subclasses, given that there would be a lot of, you know, overlapping abilities with all of the Bushcraft skills. We do, however, get some fun magic items, which is always nice. That is not to be expected from a class supplement at all. I really especially like this legendary bow that upgrades as it literally gives you certain tasks to unlock, like slaying a legendary creature or making a great sacrifice to alleviate the pain of another. And that unlocks new abilities and becomes a really powerful, cool legendary item that's very awesome. It's a little bit... It's like 90% weapons, which is kind of disappointing, but I'm not going to complain too much because just having any kind of magic items is very cool and fun. We also get some sage advice. So this is kind of like a FAQ for the Ranger abilities, because some of them, you know, with the crafting, there's some abilities that can inflict burning or bleeding. I would be very careful, this is kind of to all designers, about adding too many new quirky status effects, because it does end up feeling a little bit fiddly. Me as a DM, I hate keeping track of a lot of things that are like, okay, this will do, you know, poison damage every round or burning damage every round. It can get really difficult to keep track of. You don't necessarily have to completely stay away from those, but that's not something that usually makes me very excited, to be honest. And then this is kind of a cute little adding some version of adventure hooks and ideas through in-game story journals that would be appropriate for a Ranger to find, or a Ranger to leave behind as well. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Ranger redesign. Pros: you can earn and expend focus during combat to gain rogue and monk-like abilities. I think focus is a good idea on paper. I can't comment too much on the balance because I'm not, you know, playtesting this class at the moment. But I like monk abilities, and a focus is basically monk abilities that give you a lot of options on what you can do any turn. You can, and maybe you don't want to use rapid fire all the time. You could save that for blade dance, or really turn your Ranger into more of a rogue. Unfortunately, maybe you kind of lose the class's whole Ranger-ness by having such flexibility, but that's kind of an interesting other side of the coin. Pro: specialize your Ranger with over 24 Bushcraft skills. There are a lot of these skills, which I like a lot. I also do like the idea of the tiered skills, which again, I think 1D&D is going to do with feats, where like, okay, some feats are designed for level 1 starter, and then you actually have to unlock other feats. And yes, I'm aware that older editions of D&D totally did this. 3rd edition, you know, they definitely did the prerequisites where, okay, you have to take dodge first before you take mobile or whatever else. I feel like we're maybe starting to get back into that because a lot of people really like feats and the ability to, you know, kind of customize your character a little further. And that's really what these Bushcraft skills are. You know, I keep saying Warlock Invocations, but they're also really feats. They're borrowing from a lot of different feats and attaching that to the character, and you can pick and choose different abilities. And for the most part, I really do like that. It's just interesting that it feels like the baseline Ranger without any of these Bushcraft skills doesn't actually offer a whole lot built in. You really have to take a lot of these Bushcraft skills to make up for it, to just become like what would normally be a normal Ranger, I suppose. And pro: over half a dozen magic items designed for Rangers. Yay, we get magic items with some art, which is pretty cool. I definitely like that, and that's not something I would expect from a class redesign, so that is a thumbs up for me. My only real con, and yes, obviously I have some misgivings about the class itself, which I mentioned, but it's nothing that's a complete con. The big con for me is the lack of subclasses. I really feel like that's inexcusable, especially at this stage late in 5e's production, where we get subclasses are way more common than classes or class redesigns, and we have so many to choose from. How on earth does this class interact with a lot of those subclasses, or give me some new subclass ideas that kind of build on what we've done here, and how to turn such a highly flexible character into a more specialized role with these different subclasses? Because that's my biggest worry looking at this redesign, is trying to wrap my head around how it would operate with the different subclasses. Final verdict: inspired by Monk Key Points and Warlock Invocation, this Ranger redesign provides interesting flexibility and choice-driven progression. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.